The situation in Nigeria must be understood from a historical context. And that history gives you a Nigeria which, when the North and the South came together, there was what could be described as the Muslim North, and for want of a better term, the Christian South, or largely Christian South. But remember, there are also other African religions, but that is the preferred definition. With the consequence that Nigeria has always had tension of one kind or another, the tension that led to the civil war in Biafra, which was not founded on Christianity at all, and of course the many coups d'etats that saw at that time in the 1960 of the killing of people like Ahmadu Bello from the north and the imposition of the military administration. But to come to more recent history is that there are elements within Nigeria in the north, and this came to the fore in the year 2009 with the formation of what is now popularly known as Boko Haram by Yusuf Mahmoud. When Yusuf Mahmoud formed Boko Haram at that time, there were a number of things that were defining the philosophy. And remember that the version of Islam that he propagated is Salafism. And Salafism is a sect of Sunni Muslim. And their argument was that they want to restore Nigeria to the original Islam as was practiced by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. When that happened in 2009, of course, Muhammad Yusuf was arrested. And when he was arrested and he died in jail, he became a martyr. And that changed the complexion of Boko Haram, which means Western education is bad, if you are to render it in simplistic terms. And the whole idea, and this is what they were selling at that time, what is the value of this education where you get education, but there are no jobs, there are no opportunities, and that appealed to very many young people in northern Nigeria. And that is why it is characterized as Muslims rising against Christians. When Mahmoud Yusuf died in prison and Abu Bakr Shekau then became the leader of Boko Haram, there were then quite a number of splits within the Boko Haram that we knew, with allegiance being declared to Al-Qaeda in Iraq and in Syria. Meanwhile, activities then heightened and they started killing persons because of their religious affiliation. But it must also be remembered that even Muslims were killed in the process. But the declaration was that we want to Islamize not only the northern part of Nigeria, but the entire Nigeria and introduce Sharia law. But these activities were not confined to Nigeria. It was along the Chad basin, so that Chad was affected, Niger was affected, and even Cameroon was affected. But of course, the theater of action is Nigeria. The consequence of that now has been that they have engaged in activities which have led to the death of many. You remember the bombing of the UN offices in Abuja, which led to the death of 23 people. You remember the Chibok girls, when they raided schools and picked the Chibok girls, some of whom are still in custody. And when, of course, Shekau himself died or is said to have committed suicide because there were splits within Boko Haram, we now have a situation where we have an organization which has different factions. And these factions are operating sometimes at cross purposes, and Boko Haram has been declared as a terrorist organization. And the effect of Boko Haram has been therefore to antagonize Christians. And we know that Christian clergy have been targeted. We know that churches have been targeted, and you've now created an environment that depicts these particular activities as targeting Christians. And indeed, there are Christians who have now come out and say that we are going to organize ourselves in order to resist this. But that must be contradistinguished with certain sober voices within Islam in Nigeria who say that this is a terrorist organization, should be seen as such, and we should therefore not condemn the entire Islam. But as the saying goes, bad news spreads faster than good news. So what do we have in the popular media? Muslims or Muslim organizations are killing Christians. What is the reaction from different people? Let us resist them. Let us resist what has been described in different quarters as the Arabization and Islamization of Africa. And this is the context in which we now find Nigeria being a point of reference from no lesser space than the United States of America. The United States of America, through the President Donald Trump, is saying, if Nigeria cannot protect Christians, we are going to move in viciously, and we are going to do so to protect Christians. And I think Trump is being advised that the Nigerian government is working softly on this issue because President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is a Muslim, because Vice President Shetima is also a Muslim, and that if it were different, they would behave differently. But from where I sit, that is not necessarily the case. And these are individuals who are known to me. My own view is that you are dealing with an organization which is out of control, which is engaged in unconventional warfare, and is not going to be easy to defeat them, because they are not your regular army wearing army uniform. They are not arranged and organized in battalions and brigades. They could be somebody who is walking in the street and propagating their agenda. They hit when you don't expect, and they hit what you don't expect. Even when you say you are going to bomb them, who are you going to bomb? Where? In which location are they crowded that you'll bomb them and finish them? These are the questions must be called into question. And you can see and hear the reaction of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, and by extension the Nigerian government. They reacted by saying they welcome the United States of America to help them fight Boko Haram. That is the situation as it is. What is happening diplomatically, we may not know. But you've seen a world where there is a new hegemon who believes they are going to fight for Christianity anywhere and everywhere. That is the situation as it is now. You know, when we talk about Nigeria and we talk about the pronouncement of President Trump, many things come to mind. Number one, why is Trump saying what is he's saying? Is he saying it for Christian domestic consumption? Is he the latter-day defender of Christianity? And what I'm saying is a matter of speculation, and I think he's addressing many audiences. Remember, he rode on the crest of evangelical Christians to become the president for what is now called Trump 2. And he's telling them, in this day and age, when Christianity is on the decline and Islam is on the ascendance, I am the leader of what can be described as Christianity. And when Christianity is addressed anywhere in the world or is threatened anywhere in the world, I'll be that leader in the world who will come out and defend Christianity. That is to the American audience. To the Nigerian audience, he's also saying, oh, you cannot be protected by your administration. I'm the leader of the free world. This free world, which was created by Christendom, is under threat. And I am that leader who knows no boundaries. I'm that leader who is going to be your latter-day savior. I'm that leader who is going to come and do what is necessary in order to protect you. I am the peacemaker. Remember that President Trump is on record as saying that he is the one who deserves the Nobel Peace Prize. I'm God's gift to the world. I run around the world and do only one thing, make peace. You saw me making it in Gaza. You see me trying to make it in Ukraine. You see me everywhere. You see making peace between Thailand and Cambodia. I am that person. But I am doing it because of a Christian ethic. That is my interpretation of what President Trump is trying to do. The other thing that he's trying to do is to send a message to the emerging powers or other powers in the world. He's sending a message to China, sending a message to Russia, sending a message to the BRICS world. Remember, you may make a claim to New World Order, but from where I sit, there is only one order, and that order is the order as dictated by the United States of America. And if anybody were to doubt that interpretation, just listen to him during his address to the UN General Assembly when he is disparaging the UN and almost saying that the UN is good for nothing. And therefore, the only people and the only country that you can rely on is the United States of America. This United States of America, which is great. This United States of America that has military prowess. This United States of America, which is an economic giant, the only one that you can rely on. So these messages are, in my view, coded, addressing different audiences and lending themselves to different interpretations. And when you do that, then you confuse your enemy and you become mysterious to your enemies, real and perceived. And in the Nigerian situation, I think that is exactly what he's doing. And remember that President Trump has deliberately renamed the Department of Defense as the Department of War. So it's very clear that you've got to wage war, however you describe it, for purposes of telling the world, if you don't play ball, we are going to crush you. And see his use of language is going to be swift, nasty, and sweet. I mean, that is a contradiction in terms, but he uses language in that way. What we're saying is very interesting, and it can be defined by this age-old saying that one man's or one person's freedom fighter is another's terrorist. And you and me and all of us know that the international agenda has always been dictated by Western narratives. So that if you look at the media via which we talk about events, if it is events between Russia and Ukraine, the people who articulate it for mass consumption will be the CNN, will be the BBC, will be Deutsche Welle, will be Radio France or France, the French media, will be Fox, and all those media will be Al Jazeera, which will also be influenced by the West. And that is what mass consumption is all about. And it is the West, and particularly the United States, that has taken the burden, in their view, of defining who is who. So if you don't do what is in the best interest of the United States of America, you don't do that which is in the best interest of Western Europe as led by the United States of America, then you are a dictator. You are a dictator because you are not doing their bidding. So Russia can say that you told us we are not moving 1 inch more to the east. And when they want to protect that with boots on the ground, you are a dictator. And that is not to be compared with what happened in the 1960s when the Russians, at the invitation of the Fidel Castro government, invited the Russians, and the Americans said, you cannot have Russian military hardware 90 kilometers away from the American shoreline. So it is the bullies always have their way, and they tell you what is right and what is wrong. That is the position in which we are. You and me have recently seen, those of us who are listening to this, who have seen what is happening in the United States of America, that there were riots or demonstrations throughout the United States of America in which Americans came out and said, no kings. And what were they saying? That their president appears to be governing through fiat, executive fiat. He's fighting everybody on site. He's fighting universities. He's fighting the military. He's fighting everybody on site. But yet, in popular media, even media that is not ordinarily pro-Trump like CNN, are reluctant to label him a dictator. Fox, of course, will never allow him to be labeled a dictator, and even Western media will never label him a dictator. But you in Russia try to do that. You in China try to do that. You in Brazil try to do that. You in Nigeria try to do the same thing. You are a dictator who ought to be removed from office sooner rather than later. The narrative is defined by the United States of America and the European Union. And you can see how quick these institutions are normally inclined towards issuing statements about things. Sometimes they don't even understand, sometimes they don't know, but they are quick to issue this statement and that statement and to condemn and say how they are going to interfere when it serves their interest. So it is still true, as this cliche goes, that international politics is still governed by the law of the jungle and through gunboat diplomacy. And that is what is happening. The weak are dominated, the strong dominate and define the agenda. You know, when I heard this statement that the United States of America has issued a statement that if the Boko Haram continue to kill Christians, America is going to invade Nigeria, I asked myself a number of questions. Number one, in which specific territory does the Americans believe that there is a group of people called Boko Haram, so that if you send your tomahawks there, you eliminate them? Number two, have they consulted the government of the Federal Republic of Nigeria and agreed with them that we need assistance in terms of intelligence and that therefore this will be a coordinated strike? Number three, have you understood what Boko Haram is all about, and have you understood the history of Boko Haram and that this is an ideology? And I asked myself a foundational question: have the Americans not learned that, as they were told by the Afghans several years ago, that you have the watch but we have the time? Have they not learned from Vietnam that you can never defeat these people who are ideologically inclined? So unfortunately, if the United States of America were to use any military means in the hope of neutralizing Boko Haram, they'll be shocked, because there is not a group of people sitting somewhere who are waiting to be bombed called Boko Haram. Boko Haram, I believe, are individuals who are embedded in families. It is an ideology. It will metastasize like cancer. So it is something that I believe ought to be rethought. And I hope that the government of the United States of America will do that which is good and right to consult with the administration of the Federal Republic of Nigeria and ask them if they need assistance. And if they need assistance, the kind of assistance that they need. If they need intelligence, let them be the ones that define what kind of intelligence. Otherwise, this nuclear approach to killing a mosquito or killing a tortoise, as it were, is one that will be met with utter defeat and utter regret. And if there was any doubt, see what has happened to Libya. If there was any doubt, see what happened to Syria. The irony of the world today is that there is a word that is bandied around which means, and which is called democracy. As I grow older, I'm very reluctant to use the word democracy because the version of it that we use in most of the world is one that is defined to us by Europe and America. And I think in the United States of America, it's Abraham Lincoln who defined it, I think in a quite a sober manner at that time, a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Understood in that sense, and even if you translated it in every language, it is innocent. But over the years, democracy has changed its meaning to mean what America wants countries to do, what Europe wants countries to do. I prefer to use the much broader word good governance or governance. But let us settle for the sake of Venezuela to think about democracy as has been defined to them by the United States of America. Remember, the United States of America, in its silent and even public statements, believes that the entire region in Latin America is their backyard. And because it is their backyard, the people and the leadership must do what they want. And if you doubted that, you can see when they are comfortable, they are comfortable. When you have leaders who are doing their bidding, and when leaders are not doing their bidding, if it is Noriega in Nicaragua, if it is Bishop in Grenada, if it is Bolsonaro in Brazil, then they love them the way. If it is Milei in Argentina, then it's fine. But when you have Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, who is saying we are going to respect what the international order says, that all nations are sovereign and are equal. We want to use our oil the way we want to use our oil without being dictated to, then America becomes uncomfortable. Then they are saying now, in order to finish an administration which is inherited from Hugo Chavez of Maduro, what they are doing is that they are destroying America. One, they are at the center of drugs and even label Maduro as the head of the drug cartel. And they are saying that of the president of Colombia. So they are saying we are going to solve the problem for you. But they are not talking about Mexico, which is a little bit bigger, and therefore they are not going to deal with in the Venezuela way. So in my view, what is happening in Venezuela and the American attitude is very deliberate. Not only at the level of the United Nations, it's coordinated. That is why the opposition leader gets the Nobel Prize, in order to raise her profile. That is how the Americans then, in a very coordinated fashion, are also saying that they are at the head of a drug cartel. That is why they are saying we are now deploying CIA into Caracas. We are deploying CIA on covert activities and overt activities. What is the whole idea? We want regime change. They want somebody else to replace Maduro. And you can see the marshalling of military arsenal in the Caribbean Sea with a view to, is pure classical gunboat diplomacy, to tell Maduro, if you don't leave, we are going to help you out. And that is the kind of democracy that America plays about it. So democracy is also very nuanced. It has different meanings. It means that if you are a little country, democracy means doing what America wants you to do. That is what democracy means, what Europe wants you to do. When they blow the whistle, you wag your tail. Then you are a Democrat. Then you'll begin to get awards. Then you'll be invited to the Oval Office and possibly be made to sit and appear to sign. Then you'll have a press conference with the President of the United States of America. You'll be interviewed by Fox. Then you become a hero. That is democracy a la Trump. What is happening in the Caribbean is almost unprecedented. When you see a power such as the United States of America very undiplomatically saying, one, that we have operationalized CIA within Venezuela. We have moved our military assets in the Caribbean Sea. Without being paranoid, what is being projected and telegraphed is that we are ready to put boots on the ground. And the reason why we actually were allowing the CIA to operate is to tell us where to hit. So that before we get boots on the ground, we soften the ground. And it is very easy in a country that is divided to create an environment where the leader runs away. Because once you create an environment that makes it unsafe for Maduro and the people around him to feel uncomfortable, then they run away. And when they run away, then there is a vacuum. And once there is a vacuum, then America can fill it with whoever you want. Remember, at one time, there was even an attempt at creating a government in exile. So you can very quickly have Maduro out and bring in people to say, you are now the ones that are going to be in charge of Venezuela. And once you are in charge of Venezuela, the great old America will give you the necessary support as you go through transition. I'm not saying that that is what will be the case, but these are scenarios that I believe everybody, even in Caracas, must be thinking about the possibilities. And even those who say that they are supporting Venezuela would not want to get into that space, because the nature of these wars is that if you get into those spaces, you are stuck in mud for a long time. Who wants to be stuck in mud? You know, over the years, there have been allegations that many of these organizations that became monsters were financed by people who thought they could use them. So when you hear people saying that certain Western agencies financed Osama bin Laden in his early days, financed Boko Haram, financed all these organizations, we must be very slow to say they don't. We must be very slow, because the way the world works is that things are more complicated than we see on the surface. But as Frankenstein once said, you create a monster and then you lose control of the monsters. So they start as little embryos. Once they become monsters, then they acquire a life of their own, and you can no longer control them. They metastasize and acquire different life, different ideologues. So it is quite possible that is happening, and indeed has happened before. And many times we know that fifth columnists are introduced, particularly by Western intelligence agencies, for purposes of torpedoing that which is good in different parts of the world. So you never know. Never be quick to say it is not happening. Be very slow in the knowledge that the imperialist works in very unique ways. You know, when you talk about drug trafficking in Latin America, somebody posed a very interesting question. He says, but why don't you persuade Americans not to take drugs? Of course, that is an interesting response to it. But the other thing is that the demand and supply side there are things that are tied in the hip like Siamese twins. But the reality is that these cartels are to be found in Mexico, the Escobars of this world, the bigger people in Colombia, in Mexico, in Venezuela, as we know. And the reality is that Venezuela is a soft target. Is a soft target because we now know beyond peradventure that some of the people whose boats have been struck are fisher people. They are not drug dealers. And that this extrajudicial killing is without basis. What one would do in ordinary circumstances, given the Americans' dominance on the sea, is to arrest these individuals. You arrest them and bring them to the United States of America for purpose of being tried. But in the case of Venezuela, I think a number of things are designed to be achieved. That you have Maduro here, who is a leftist, and is seen not to be playing ball with the United States of America. You have Lula in Brazil, who is at the heart of BRICS, which is trying to impact negatively the dollar and American economic hegemony. So how do we start? By sending a clear message to everybody in Latin America: if you don't play ball, we are going to deal with you with the way we dealt with Venezuela. And remember, the oil deposits in Venezuela and the geographical location in Venezuela is also very important from a geostrategic standpoint. Therefore, America would want to see some kind of lapdog, some kind of poodle of leadership in Venezuela to have comfort that that area, and by extension the Caribbean, is under their control. And that is why I think the United States of America, particularly during the Trump administration, is behaving the manner in which it is behaving. And when Trump says, "Make America great again," and is telling the world we are looking inward, I think there is also a sense in which he wants to project America as the dominant power. And if you don't restrict my examples in thinking about this issue, look at their recent statement in the ASEAN meeting. He's telling the ASEAN, make sure that China does not dominate. And that message is reverberating. Look at the message to Milei. We are going to give you money in Argentina, but only if you elect Milei or people related to him. So America is saying we want to occupy our immediate war post-1945 position in which we tell the world what is good for the world. And the Venezuelans of this world are the examples that will be used, that if you don't follow that script, then we destroy you. So elect leaders who know what to do, leaders who respect and obey instructions unquestioningly. That is, I think, the message that is being sent by the current administration in the United States of America. Today, the world is very complicated, and we are in a space which is with precedent. I remember in the 1960s when there were military coups d'etats in Latin America, later in Africa, it was very easy when you are talking about leadership to talk about this is dictatorship and this is not dictatorship. And during that period, there was the tendency when coup d'etats were manufactured from the West, even if one was dictatorial in their ways, it would be ignored. But today, dictatorship must be understood in the context of governance. And why are people governed the way they are? Europe and America wants to make us believe that dictatorship or democracy only exists, number one, where there are multi-party elections, number two, where there is a vibrant civil service, And number three, where the leaders accept to be criticized and all those things. That to them is what democracy is all about. And sometimes it is not about service delivery. There are countries that are now beginning to say that all government is in some way dictatorship. A dictatorship that we have allowed to be done in a constitutional manner. And I'm using the word dictatorship here very deliberately because governments are instituted amongst men to midwife delivery of services. And if we have a government that does this, you label it dictatorship all you want, but we accept it. You can see that in the case of Rwanda, for example. You talk to the ordinary Rwandese, they'll tell you, but they are delivering electricity. They are delivering water, they are delivering on education, so why are you calling them dictatorship? You see frequently now in the case of the Sahel nations, in Mali, in Niger and Burkina, the African Union has said that they acquired power through unconstitutional meetings and constitutional means, and they have been suspended from the African Union. But the people are saying, but they are delivering for us. There are difficulties, but we accept them. So I believe that the problem we have in the world today is that the West is still stuck in this superiority complex, which makes them think that they are the ones who ought to tell the world what the world ought to do. You hear, for example, the West saying that China is a dictatorship. But the Chinese are saying this is democracy with a Chinese character. They are saying Russia is a dictatorship, but the Russians are saying this is our style. We have done it for many years. And the people, the critical masses of the people accept it as our way. Why do you want us to wear dresses which you've made for us which don't fit us? So the debate is still on, but I hold the view that governance is something that must be culturally specific and must be informed by the realities of a nation, and that the people in that nation must have an input on how they are governed to ensure that they reap the dividends of their taxes and their efforts. And perhaps the time is now to re-examine some of these terminologies which were fostered on us by the West. In the case of Africa, as I've always said, that the time is now for Africans to rethink and to reimagine governance. That is not to say that we go back to the old ways. No, we re-examine, we adopt and adapt as defined by circumstances.